that we're making decisions to be our ideal version of what we think is a more complete version of masculinity, and implementing that into our actions on a daily basis. But I think that in order for that to happen, there does have to be conscious thinking. Like, you have to actually sit down and think about this. Like, what does this look like? Like, how are my day-to-day actions going to be different if I want to, if I want to create this different version of masculinity. Hey guys, my name is Dean Pohlman, founder of Manflow Yoga. I am the host of the Better Man podcast, and I am on Ever Forward Radio to discuss all things masculinity. In today's episode, we talk about traditional masculinity. What can we learn from it? What needs to be improved? We also talk about the emerging new ideas of what masculinity means. And ultimately, we talk about how to tie all of this together into a more effective form of masculinity that's better for the world and better for ourselves as men.
I would love to dive into, just out of the gate, a topic that has been on my mind, on my heart. And, after talking with you recently, I think you as well. And being that the two of us are men, content creators, partners, spouses, husbands, you've got father on me as of now, but I feel like male leaders, male content creators, just, if nothing else, I think a lot of what we do and who sees us is very male forward. But a part of that is male connection. Yeah, we're doing a lot of things. We might be leading the charge on some things, but especially in the digital age, oddly enough, I feel like we have even more disconnect in general with people and what we do and how we do it, but especially in the brotherhood, in the male connection and just male meaningful relationships. And I really don't think we're alone. And that's exactly actually kind of what you and I talked about recently on my latest episode on your show. But I would love to kind of bring it full circle and get your perspective as a father now of two, as a creator, an entrepreneur called, Manflow Yoga, leading the charge for this modern version of masculinity. How would you define the status of the modern man today? Not exactly defining what a modern man is, but like the status, the perceived status of where that type of person is. What are they struggling with? What are they succeeding with? Just where are we? Let's get a pulse check on the modern male status today, man.
Yeah, so this is something that I discuss in, you've been on my podcast, the Better Man podcast, and this is kind of a concept that I explore. It's the whole reason I kind of started the Better Man podcast in the first place. And I'll preface that by saying Manful Yoga is my business. That's why I provide male focused yoga content. But ultimately, the goal with that stems from this desire to improve. It stems from this belief that we can be better. And when I look at kind of the status of masculinity today, I think we're in this period of reevaluating what that means. And it's also, in a lot of ways, you could say that it's under attack. I don't know if the attack story is the right one. I think I would like to think more so that we are realizing that there's a potential better way to do this, that there's a way that we could do it, that we could define masculinity in a way that is more inclusive and not just one version of what masculinity is, but instead coming up with maybe different role models of what that could look like, or even better yet, just coming up with overall concepts that can be universally applied. You don't have to be this way in order to be considered a strong masculine man. There are lots of different ways that that can be that can be personified, that can be acted in real life. So for me, the big question is, how do we take what is and has been effective, helpful in terms of our traditional sense of masculinity, and how do we now reconcile that with the aspects of masculinity that are missing from that? And namely, these are aspects that tend to come at an emotional and mental cost to our well-being. So I think it's figuring out what that looks like, and it's also popularizing just this idea of being more vulnerable, of having more connection emotionally with other men. That's what we really talked about, was just this huge lack of emotional connection with other men, intimacy with other men in a non-sexual way, just intimacy in the sense that, having conversations that get to emotions, that get onto a deeper level, where we're having these conversations that go beyond, oh man, did you see the game last week? Or like, let's go watch the game together and let's have a few beers. But, you know, really getting into, hey man, this is really struggling. I'm really struggling with this right now. And I'd like to talk about it with you. And I'd like to, are you going through the same thing? Kind of thing. So that's a broad range of ideas about what you asked, but that's kind of what I see it as. It's the figuring out what's going well, let's keep that, and what's missing, let's try to integrate that.
I was just jotting down some notes. I wanted to make sure I came back to these. First and foremost, you mentioned how the modern man, the modern male archetype will say,
Yeah.
you're kind of questioning, is it more so under attack or is it other stuff? My first question is, if we are under attack, if the modern man, that archetype, that definition, that shell is under attack, who is attacking it and why, do you think?
Hmm. The idea of toxic masculinity that's come up is, I think it's good in the sense that we are pointing out aspects of masculinity that are that not helpful to anybody. They're ultimately hurtful. So I think it's good that we're pointing out some of these things, like, hey, this actually isn't a good thing. Like, we think about this thing as manly, and actually you're just being an asshole. Like, this is not a good thing. So we should call this out, and we should revise this. Um, the problem with that is that people have jumped onto that, and now anytime they see something that they don't like that's masculine, they're like, that's toxic masculinity. So it's becoming kind of this catch-all, like, let's, I don't like this, so I'm going to call it toxic masculinity. I'm going to throw it in my bucket of things that I cancel. And it just makes it eliminates having a conversation about the good aspects of masculinity. Like, I think that masculinity, when it's practiced in a way that's helpful, is something that provides reassurance. It provides a foundation. It provides comfort. Um, it provides helpful discipline. It provides inspiration. And those things can all be practiced in a way that is not helpful, but to throw out all of that just because it's masculine, and to try and,
It's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater kind of thing.
exactly, throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And then I think trying to, instead of having a masculine and a feminine, I'm trying to say, like, well, these are all, like, we can have, instead of saying masculine or feminine, let's just make it like one thing. and there's just being a good human. And to which extent I think that that can be true. I haven't personally done the thinking or had the conversations or the training to be able to talk about, okay, here's like a gender neutral versus masculine and feminine. But I think the important thing to remember for this conversation is that we are their masculinity as a whole is, I think, under attack, and we're at risk of throwing out all of masculinity in an effort to get rid of some bad manifestations of masculinity.
Well said. Well said. And I do agree with a lot of that. And I think that's probably, well, I should say, I ponder, I wonder if this is also getting lobbed into a lot of what we have seen over the last several years in terms of cancel culture.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not making the statement that that 100% is true, but I'm kind of just trying to connect some dots here as to what we have seen over the years. And that's when one person does one thing wrong. Now, granted, yes, some of these things are very, very high level wrong.
Yeah.
And I think objectively are truths that we all hold, or, things that we should not say or do. But just kind of, again, connecting some dots here as to what we might give a definition to or explanation to is that, yeah, a lot of these old trains of thought, instead of just keeping what works and evolving, contributing to the evolution of what we want to come next, we're just getting rid of it all. We're, burning it all down and rebuilding entirely instead of
Mm-hmm.
just modifying. And so to that, I want to come back and ask a question. You mentioned earlier as well, tradition, traditional masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
And I also want to make the quick caveat. I believe here, Dean, you and I were talking about masculine and feminine in the terms of, energetic forces. We're not talking about, gender per se, but
Mm-hmm.
the traditional kind of outline of masculinity and femininity that you
Yeah.
and I align with tradition. Is this something that we really should be keeping, because there is so much good and so much in there that we should still be aligning with in terms of the modern masculine, or do we just need to update it? Should we be keeping this and kind of optimizing it, or just burning it down and starting from scratch?
I think we hold on to tradition with just in general, I think we hold on to a tradition with a kind of a lack of logic for a lot of reasons. I think we hold on to things that
Just
we
because we've been
know.
doing it for so long a certain way, it's just,
Yeah.
that's just why.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah. So I think it's parts of both because I think we get used to doing things a certain way. Humans are, we like to know what things are. We like to have we like to have our representation of the world, how we picture it in our mind. We like to preserve that, whether we are aware of that or not. We like to have like, this is how the world makes sense to me, and I'm going to do what I can to make sure that the world stays that way, and even if it's not helpful. So I think it's difficult for anybody to be objective. It's difficult for anybody to be, truly objective and to look at things and say, okay, we need to get rid of this because it's not working anymore, because we have some emotional and some subconscious attachment to that. I think where I think what we're not considering is we are seeing the emergence of so many more different types of people. We're seeing that we are way more diverse than we thought. Um, think of the LGBTQIA plus community and how many, how many of those people does the traditional archetype of the masculine man, how does that does that work for them? And how does that make them feel when society says this is what a man should be, and they're here saying like, well, I'm a man, like don't I get to have my own standards? So I think that we need to, I think it's good to have tradition if it's helpful. I mean, it's good to have that tradition if we can, you know, look to that. But what I think is really important is that we are moving ever forward. We're moving ever forward to a community where there are many more types of people, and the existing idea of what a man is does not work for all of these different people.
You We're talking about these kind of forms of attachments that we definitely have. I think we're probably more aware of some than others. So for that, my question is, if you were to look at, in your opinion, the most obvious conscious and subconscious attachments we as modern men might have, what do you think they are? By conscious, I mean, what are the things probably you and I, most guys listening right now, most people, aligning with the masculine archetype here, are really, really aware of, whether
Mhm.
that's just how you were raised or tradition or whatever. And what are some of these subconscious attachments that we might not be able to quite put our finger on as to why we hold this truth, but it just kind of is maybe this innateness that is part of masculinity.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good distinction. So if we think about some of the conscious ideas that we hold on to, those are ones that we've made some effort to those are things that we've made some effort to understand and to implement, right? So those are things like being a strong leader. Those are things like being kind. Those are things like the never give up idea and having grit, having determination. And I think the more harmful ones are the subconscious ones. These are the ones that really have hurt men, not just men, but also women. These are the ones that say, I have to be strong in order to be loved. I have to be successful in order to be loved, because that's what it really all comes down to. It comes down to this worthiness of love. You can start somewhere. You can say like, I have to be successful in order to provide for my family. But when you trace that back to, well, why do you need to be successful for your family? Well, I need to be able to provide for them. Okay, why do you need to provide for them? Because I'm a man and it's my job. Why is it your job? Because in order for me to be a good man, that's what I have to do. It's like, well, why do you want to be a good man? Because I want someone to be proud of me. Like, why do you want them to be proud of you? Because I want them to love me, right? So if you trace back all of these reasons, ultimately it comes back to, I believe this on a subconscious level. And because I believe this, it is saying that in order to be loved, I have to do X. In order to be loved, I have to be Y. And we're going to have those thoughts no matter what. Like, all of us are we're all just trying to deal with the childhood issues that we had when we developed,
Ain't
like
that the
from
truth, my man?
from
Ain't
like
that the truth?
right from like whatever happened to us between ages 3 and 7. We're all
Mhm.
just trying to spending decades in psychologist office trying to get over those issues, taking mushrooms to like
I'm
figure out,
I'm
oh
laughing, not
God.
joking at it, but because of like how freaking true that is. And as a 37-year-old guy still unpacking stuff from that age range you're talking about. And I know you can relate.
Yeah. So like we're going to have those subconscious beliefs that cause us to have this perception that we need to do something in order to be loved. But that doesn't mean that we should not explore those reasons and potentially, hey, like if this was an issue, let's fix this. So like the next generation doesn't have to go with this. And so that's why I think it's important to have these conversations, because we are consciously trying to change these deeply held subconscious beliefs that ultimately make us not love ourselves and not be able to receive love. And ultimately, I think the idea of love for men is like an icky word. Like I'm talking about this now and I feel uncomfortable. Like one of the reasons I do things that I do is because I like to do things that make me uncomfortable because I know that there is growth opportunities there. So for me to be, on a podcast and to say like the word love, like it feels icky. Like it doesn't feel good to me. And that's because like I have this subconscious belief that strong men do not express love. They just do what needs to get done. They don't complain. They're strong. They're capable. They make money. They look jacked. And then they come home and they're just like rocks for their family. But they don't need to have emotions. They don't need to express love. Like the most they need to do is like, good job, right? Just like a nod of approval, right? There doesn't need to be like a. So I think that when we think about like the traditional male, the one that we hold subconsciously, that's what we need to be able to access, not the one that we come up with through like thought and experience, through active thought, but the one that just kind of gets inside of us without us really having any say on whether or not that's what we believe.
Beautiful explanation. Thank you so much. And before I kind of jump into, you begin to hint on, how we can actually remedy these things and how can we change here and now, but also talking about the next generation of men, the next generation of masculinity, and especially, that ickiness, you're talking about. I think a lot of guys are
Mm-hmm.
there, and it doesn't seem to really make sense when we talk about masculinity in non-sexual intimacy, masculinity and love. But we'll
Mm-hmm.
get there. We'll get there. But before we do, I was bringing up some notes from a book that I read years and years and years ago, and was the first, I will say, self-help book I ever read, and it just so happens to be heavily focused on masculinity. And I'm curious, are you familiar with King, Warrior, Magician, Lover?
No, but I will add it to my read list.
This, when I first got hooked on, social media and watching YouTube, especially fitness YouTube back in the day, I was a big Elliot Hulse junkie.
Okay.
I haven't really watched a lot of his stuff in a long time. But you know who I'm talking about, right? Yo
I,
Elliott.
I have a good story if you want to you want me to
Oh,
tell that really quickly. Elliot
okay.
actually Elliot invited me to his gym to record yoga videos in 2014. He loved yoga at the time and he found me on YouTube.
Yeah.
He was like, dude, you should come down and record some yoga videos. And I responded like, cool, let's do it. And then I followed that up with, can you pay for my flight? I'm going to be at Ultra Music Festival and I need to change my flight that weekend. And he responded, he's like, no, just no, we're not doing this anymore. So like that's my Elliot Hole story.
I
Yeah.
love how yoga, Elliot Hulse, and Ultra Music Festival were all in the same sentence. That
Yeah.
that is the new modern masculinity I'm talking about.
Yeah. So that's a great story of how I messed up a potential a very,
Oh,
very helpful relationship.
well, we're talking right around the kind of the same time. This actually, when I first discovered Elliot, I think it was probably maybe 2010, 11. And I
Mm-hmm.
picked up this book that he always referenced, King, Warrior, Magician, Lover,
Mm-hmm.
Rediscovering the Archetypes of the Mature Masculine.
Mm.
Now, I do, before we move on, I want to kind of go to a place where I feel like tradition still does hold a lot of value. I feel like tradition, whether we're talking about um, definitions, belief systems, rituals, practices, there is a reason and a place, a time and a place for rituals in the human experience. And I want to say why is because humans are nothing without rituals. This is exactly how we have evolved and progressed, as a society, religions, community, culture, love, coming of age. There are innate rituals in pretty much every human civilization. And I do want to lean into, I do agree with a lot of what you're saying, Dean. And I do agree in general that the traditional male archetype, the traditional definition and version and representation of masculinity, man, it's due for a facelift. But that doesn't
Mhm.
mean, like we said earlier, we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. But I
Right.
do want to lean into tradition a little bit more here because I feel like when we carve out the masculine self, the masculine energy, and kind of just what happens in the masculine experience, these four archetypes of king, warrior, magician, lover, I feel still hold a lot of worth, a lot of value. I'm not
Mhm.
saying these are now the only ones, but for me, they hold a lot of weight. And
Yeah.
we're talking about king, warrior, magician, lover, what it means to have the energy of being just and creative, the energy of aggressive but non-violent action, the energy of initiation and transformation, and finally, lover, the energy that connects one to others in the world. And I want to lean into the key word here being energy. This is
Mhm.
not a pure alignment with, this is not being defined as a man or defining masculinity as one of these quadrants. This isn't you are one or the other. This is kind of the spectrum of the energy that it takes and the energy and how it shows up in masculinity.
Mhm.
When I say those four out loud, Dean, do you feel in alignment with those? Do you feel like in general, modern masculinity has a lot to learn from these four energies, these energetic expressions of king, warrior, magician, lover?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I feel like, I mean, to give the short answer, yes. I think they definitely do. I mean, again, I haven't read the book, so I can't comment on it too much. But I think we tend to, I think a big problem is we tend to evaluate our worth as a man and how much masculinity we can do versus like, oh, I'm going to do everything that I can that's masculine and I don't want to do anything that's on the feminine side because that makes me less of a man. And without tradition, we don't have just going back to what you said about tradition, without any sense of tradition, we don't have a blueprint. Like tradition gives us like this is the foundation, this is the understanding. A good example I have is I have a friend of mine, best friend that's here in Austin with me, and he is very religious, like very strong convictions as a Christian. I am not a practicing Christian, so I don't have like the same foundation of kind of practices that he has with his wife. So the benefit of having that is that he has these this foundation of practices from upon which he can draw to take actions and to have like a kind of a guiding sense of, okay, this
Like what
gives me.
exactly? Could you give the listeners some examples? Are we talking about just, core beliefs, core values, kind of just inherent attributes of the religion that he pulls from to carry over into him being a man? Is that what we're talking about?
He's here we're talking about the idea of tradition giving us a blueprint on how to act, and his as a man in the relationship with his tradition with his traditional upbringing in Christianity, he is ultimately the final arbiter of, okay, this is what we're going to do, I'm going to lead as a man. and
Aha, gotcha.
and me, I am not, my wife and I, we are not practicing Christians. So we don't have this blueprint. We don't have this tradition that we can draw upon that dictates our actions. So
Hmm.
he has this guide that he can use to help him make decisions and take action. We don't have this base. So we don't have this thing that we can
Hmm.
consult to say like, so which means we have to do like a ton of extra work to make that decision because we don't have a guide, we don't have guidelines that we can use. So the huge benefit of tradition is that it gives you a set of guidelines that you can use to make decisions and take action. Um, so just touching on the tradition part, I think that was important. But I didn't answer your I couldn't answer your
It's
question
in
because
there. It's in there. I think
yeah.
what I'm hearing you say is really, this book, these four archetypes, is comparatively like a lot of resources, a lot of traditions of religion. Someone might not have read this book, but many people come from religious upbringings with that infrastructure, that core kind of foundation of values and even archetypes that may not be exactly how they want to be, but it is a referral, if you will. It is a starting point to kind of gauge what maybe hits home closest for you and what maybe aligns with you and what you want to introduce and keep and further facilitate in your life, but also as maybe a resource of yes, no, maybe so. I'm going to keep some of these things, but adopt my own, versus like what I'm hearing you say, you didn't have that or
Chaos.
don't have that, and you're just like building as you go. You're jumping
Right.
out of the plane and constructing your parachute as you go down, instead of maybe somebody starting with a lot more out of the gate.
I think that's a good summary and creates some sense to some of what
Mm.
I said that might not have made sense. So thanks.
No, all good, all good. um One other thing that comes to mind there, I'm so glad that you brought up, in example of your friend here, but still, I think religion does hold a lot of weight for a lot of how the modern masculine is upheld.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say, speaking personally, growing up in a pretty religious household, growing up Southern Baptist Christian, I was baptized Episcopalian, grew up a little bit in Catholicism before my dad and stepmom kind of landed on Southern Baptism, which is how I grew up probably the majority of my life up until like 18 when I left home, 17. And to your earlier point of how much now as humans, but definitely men, when we're trying to step into and own and decipher and decode this masculinity aspect of our lives, a lot of that I had with me. And a lot of that I had with me, I mean, this is what a man is supposed to do. The man ultimately is the head of the household.
Mm-hmm.
And, the man says yes to these things and a man says no to these things. And I should say a good man, a moral man, a godly man, because that was not, it's not what I'm saying here, but that's what was kind of conveyed to me, my understanding of scripture and what the
Mm-hmm.
pastor was saying, every Sunday. But now in my mid to late 30s, or it really kind of started in my mid 30s, a lot of that I began to question. A lot
Mm-hmm.
of that I began to unpack, and I began to really build my own. So I'm curious with you. I guess I should ask this first question. Do you have any kind of background in a religion? Were you brought up in any particular way?
I was baptized. I went to church until I was, I think, 15. I was
Okay.
actually in the church choir for many years. And then I think one Sunday morning I just was like, no, I'm not going. And my mom,
What
she
was
just
the
couldn't.
denomination? Do you recall?
Oh, Presbyterian. Yeah.
Presbyterian. Okay, okay. So I'm sure
Yeah.
a lot of what I'm talking about you would be familiar with.
Yeah.
Um, in what ways, maybe you can speak personally if you want, or in generalities here, in what ways do you think having a religious foundation of masculinity serves the modern man? And in which ways is it a disservice? In which ways are we getting a head start? And, these practices and rituals and identities, maybe objectively we'll say, are good. And in which ways are they really consciously or subconsciously holding the modern man to a standard that might not be the standard in actuality these days, and or might not be the standard that masculinity type, that man wants to continue on with?
Well, I think that all ideologies, like a sense of what is right and wrong, is based ultimately on some form of religion originally. That was the system of thought, right? Um, unless we look at stoicism. So now I'm contradicting myself. But the point is, like, a lot of
Yeah.
what our modern understandings of what is right and wrong is based on religion. So again, like, religion provides us with a lot of the basis for this is how we should act and this is how we should not act. um i think the I think the one of the big problems with religion is, I think unless you really go deep enough into religion to the point that you understand that there are reasons for what we preach in this religion, you don't we're not accepting them just because this is what it is. I think when religion is just accepted and the message is like, if you don't do this, God doesn't love you, then I think most people who are
I
serious
heard that a lot
religious.
growing up in the Southern Baptist Church. I
Yeah.
heard that a
So there,
lot. Yeah.
so there you go. So that's a thing. And I think that we forget that ultimately religion, I mean, religion is traditional, right? Like, how much has religion evolved over the last however many centuries relative to the evolution of everything else? Like, religion is a slow evolving thing. Um, and I lost my train of thought. But religion is a very slow evolving thing. It does not change as quickly as other social institutions. And when the message attached to it is like, you have to do this, or you're going to hell, like, okay, well, you've scared me into doing something. um so while religion is also like this sense of, okay, this is what is right and this is wrong, religion is also supposed to be, this is how you connect with the divine, this is how you connect with universe, this is how you connect with universal oneness. And what I'm my big disillusionment with religion was that it wasn't doing what it was supposed to for me. It wasn't creating this sense of oneness of spirit. It was, this is what you do, these are things that you do, these are things that you don't do. But it was like a rule book. It wasn't like so um and
It was
my
more restrictive than being set free, which again, my experience with religion, true religion and connecting to the divine, connecting to source, connecting to God is supposed to liberate you and set you free from the pains of this human experience. Or I shouldn't say set you free, but from, develop a better relation to and understanding of what pain and suffering is, and, put trust and faith in a higher power, and to really pull yourself out of your own way, to your point, really to connect with everyone and everything else, and to have this greater sense of knowing that you are love and you are loved.
Mhm. Yeah, and that was something that it wasn't talked about. So um yeah, you're gonna have to forgive me because I am currently a newborn father. I have a 1 month old. I wake up 3 times per night, so I often lose my train of thought.
We'll have
So
to get you
hopefully, if you're
to
listening,
double dip next time in the
yeah,
ketone IQ.
yeah. So if you're listening to this and you're like, this dude doesn't know what he's talking about, just give me some patience.
It's difficult. I'll say, speaking of religion, grace here for sure, Dean. It's difficult to kind of,
Grace.
I think, unpack masculinity while also unpacking religion. They're very, very broad topics. And
Hmm.
again, depending on the personal experience, we're not here just talking about two topics. We're two guys coming from this background who are talking about, and having probably this flood of memories and emotions and experiences, and trying to even now probably, I'm assuming here, make sense of a lot of things while also give an explanation and an answer. So nothing but
Hmm.
grace here, my man. I hear that in what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But
Thank
to
you.
kind of shift from religion, because I do want to get into a couple of the key things that you brought up that I think are super important when we're unpacking masculinity. um the intimacy involved in masculinity, I think is something that is greatly overlooked.
Mhm.
And I'll tell you, my identity as a man and my barometer of where my masculinity is has never been more solidified and has never been higher than when I am my most vulnerable, my most open, my most intimate with other men in my life that I hold in high regard, that
Mhm.
I have a deep, meaningful relationship with, or I'm in process of building that. And I feel like when you know when you're in that experience, or else you wouldn't be opening up in ways that you are. Why do you think, first and foremost, most guys, or when we're looking at the definition of modern masculinity here, that isn't even on their radar? Intimacy, love isn't even in there. And secondly, how do you go about, or how do you think is a good way to go about us introducing intimacy, this non-sexual intimacy, in such this rigid container typically that is the masculine?
Yeah. I mean, it's a really simple answer, but it just mm, love, intimacy, connection, it's not cool, right? It's not like when we think about being a man and we think about being our ideal man, we think about being a hero. We think about rushing into a burning building. Um we think about being strong. We think about being competitive and being better than the next guy. We don't think about, I had this really amazing conversation with my friend and like we had this really beautiful moment together. There's also, as a society, subconsciously, we're subconsciously uh whether or not we like it. And for many people, consciously, we are homophobic. So, like, connecting with other men is like, oh, I don't want to connect with other men because I don't want to be seen as gay. So, like,
We don't want to be
whether,
seen as exact. I was going to say it has a lot less to do of what we actually believe to be true, but what we believe perceived truths could be.
right. And, think of like, I went to a pretty progressive high school, but, I can think of plenty of times in high school when I was like, oh, like, Dean did this. He's so gay. And I was like, I'm not gay. Like, so like when you're like a 15-year-old or 16-year-old and you're trying to assert yourself as cool, like, and people are, calling you gay because of like, like whatever. It doesn't feel good. So, there's not only are we, not only are we is connection, love, intimacy. It's not like what we think of when we think of the ideal man, but also there is as a culture, we are homophobic. And so like we don't want to do anything that could be perceived as gay. So that's the first part of the question. Remind me the second part of the question.
I think you kind of answered the second part first, but if I'm recalling correctly, and I don't know why I brain farted as well here, but it was, yeah. Why is this form of intimacy in the modern definition of masculinity, the modern experience? Why, in many instances, is it not even kind of expressed or not even on the table? And then
Oh yeah.
also,
It's
yeah,
not cool.
why
Yeah,
do we have such a hesitance?
yeah, so it's not cool. It's not what we think of an ideal man or like the most masculine man or the man that we want to be. For most of us, it's like our subconscious belief of what a man should be is not like being intimate, being expressive, connecting with other men. And there's also the blatant reality that
Mm,
we as a culture are homophobic. And it's getting
mm,
better, but like we're still have, I mean, 12 years ago, or even 10 years ago, or definitely 15 years ago, like,
mm.
people still said FAG and it was just like, it's just a word. You're an
Oh,
idiot. You're an FAG, right? And
oh
now you're
yeah.
like, oh,
Uh,
if you said that now, like, good luck. Like you're not coming back from that.
The things that came
So
out of my mouth 10 to 15 years ago, out of just pure ignorance, honestly. I mean, and I think
mhm.
a lot of us can relate to doing and saying things just out of the sake of going with the flow and trying to fit in. And, I
Mhm.
wholeheartedly can say
Yeah.
that was the
So like
case.
so conscious we have made improvements, but subconsciously a lot of those thoughts that we had when we were like kids, like they're still there. And I hope that the next generation doesn't have those, because as slowly
Mm.
as subconscious stays subconscious, right, and does get
Yeah.
transferred to the
Yeah.
conscious, hopefully like that's eliminated. um but then the second part of the answer is how do we start to do more of that? And the
Mm-hmm.
answer is you just start doing it. You start, you talked about this in the episode that I had with you, but instead of having conversations about things that have no meaning, why don't you have a conversation, like start the topic, like introduce something like that's actually, hey, this is something that I really want to talk about. This is something that I'm actually feeling. This is something that I'm struggling with. Like instead of going to, hanging out with your friend and saying, man, my business is crushing it. We're doing this. Oh, I got to hook you up with my friend Bill. He does this, say like, hey man, like I'm really struggling right now. Like we just had a baby, my wife is doing this, or like, that's just my situation right now. Or like, um, you, if we make it more general, you could say like, hey man, I'm really struggling with balancing work and also like trying to be a good dad and like trying to be a good, so if you can start initiating those types of conversations, instead of just talking about BS. Like I don't even watch sports anymore because it's I just I don't know. I watch sports if it's on and if it's like a good game, but like I don't watch sports so that I can come to my friends, say like,
So you
man,
can
I
fill
watched this
your
show,
man
and
cup.
like,
Exactly.
yeah, like
Yeah.
I don't want to have conversations about that.
Mm.
I want to have like real conversations. So the easiest way to start doing that is to start having conversations that lean into this. And I think, you know, a lot of what I do, a lot of the content that I create is rooted in the understanding that have if that is me, or like if this is true to me, then it's true to millions of other men, right? I'm not special. So like that's a guiding principle for and a lot of what I do. And I've been in therapy since 2018, I think. And
Wow.
I
Wow.
look at it as just like, this is like my weekly mental
Mm.
workout, my
Mm-hmm.
my weekly mental and emotional workout. And I asked him a few months ago, I was like, what's wrong with me, man? Just like, I know you're not supposed to tell me, but like, what's wrong? He's like, well, it's not a secret. You need more intimacy with men. You need to hang out with men more. You need to actually connect with men on
This
an
was feedback
emotional.
from your therapist. This isn't
Yeah.
just you postulating, but wow. Wow.
No, yeah, this is
Wow.
like, it's that. It's you need to have a greater range of it. That was the one thing. I don't need to talk about everything here, but like that, if that's my experience, then like that's probably the experience of
Mm-hmm.
millions of other men.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's because of those reasons before that I mentioned, that we just aren't having those connections with men. And there's other reasons too, that are just kind of the reality of men getting married and having kids. We have less time to hang out with other men, right? Or like we talked about, it's seen as like it's getting away from your wife, it's getting away from your relationship. It's like, hey, I want to go hang out with the bros, but it's taken as, oh, you don't like me, you want to get away from me. And then so you, in
Mm-hmm.
response, you're like, well, I'm not going to ask. I'm just not going to go do that. And so you lack this entire, aspect of your wellness from your life, because you're trying to appease the people who you live with.
Dude, I
So,
love everything you just said. Thank you so much for opening up and sharing all of that. And
Thanks
yeah,
for allowing
actually,
me to rant. Yeah.
no, of course, man, it all makes sense here. And yeah, if you guys want to hear more about that, that's honestly, I was thinking about our conversation recently on your show,
Hmm.
and I'll make sure to link it for everybody down in the show notes. That probably
Cool.
was one of my biggest takeaways that had me just going, a little bit longer. Why is it that we feel this need to escape our current situation, whether that's with ourselves or with a partnership, to go be with other men?
Hmm.
Instead, why can't it be a practice of healthy communication with and to ourselves, with and to our partner, as to why we want to go there and how it is actually adding value and why we need that instead of escaping something? We should never
Hmm.
be running from something and hoping or feeling that what we're escaping to is going to magically solve the problem, because we have to go back there. Unless you just
Hmm.
never come home one day, I guess that's fine. And you just stay at Buffalo Wild Wings for the rest of your life, watching the game and drinking beer, But
Yeah.
that, I think that's crucial for guys to pick up on. And before we kind of get into, I want to get to one final section here before we wrap up the show.
Hmm.
I want to just kind of drive home what you were talking about. Three kind of practices that I have that come to mind about how I feel I am inviting more of this change in masculinity in my life, and how I'm inviting in energetically other guys that are there now or are looking for maybe a little signal that this could be something. This can
Hmm.
be an intimate male relationship. This could be something that could fill us both up in our modern manlyhood. So, three things that I kind of do to fill my modern masculinity cup is: one, I've shifted away from handshakes. Now, part of this is just kind of getting away from the East Coast and, Southern California, LA. It's, we're more huggy friendly in general. But I
Yeah.
found kind of when you meet a new guy or meet a new person, it's just so, hey, how's it going? All right, cool, put it there kind of thing. It's so traditional and not a way that I like anymore. So I go
Hmm.
straight for the hug. And I think for a lot of guys, it catches them off guard. It's, cool, we're hugging. Like, some people actually say that.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
go,
Yeah.
yeah, we're hugging. And I think that immediately breaks down that wall of hey, another man can touch you, can hug you, can embrace you. And
Hmm.
it's just that. It's, I see you, brother, and I hope that
Hmm.
you see me. Another is that I have, in the right situation, of course, I don't throw around the word love lightly, but I do feel like I have love for a lot of people. It's
Hmm.
different than when I tell my wife I love you, but getting into a practice of telling other men, love you, bro, love you. Hey, man, really love hanging out with you. Just incorporating the word love more in our interactions, whether that's a hello or a sign off, whatever,
Mm.
has been a unique practice as well. Because, there are a few guys in my life where I kind of take note when the first time that I say that, like, all right, man, see you later, love you, they just don't know what to do. They're like, yeah, like, oh, like, what do you mean you love me? They don't say anything, but it throws them
Right.
off. And then now over time, they're saying it back to me. And
Mm.
I feel like, I'm hoping, I don't know, maybe I'll ask them sometime, but I feel like they've been kind of maybe more put into a position of receiving that love and getting deconditioned to what that means when someone says it. Why can't a
Hmm.
guy tell another guy that he loves him and has love for him? And so
Hmm.
now, like, they're kind of coming around and like, oh yeah, man, I love you too. All right, later. Love you guys. See ya. Just incorporating it somehow, some way, I think is another way we're kind of evolving the tradition.
Yeah.
And I had a third, but I'm trying to think exactly. I think we're both running out of steam here. But the third, um, yeah, the meaningful small talk was another big one. We kind of already
Yeah.
hit on it. So
Mm.
kind of shifting the narrative of going from, hey, what's up, bro? Hey, did you catch the game? Or hey, how's it going, man? And immediately leaning into that more masculine response of, I am man, hear me roar kind of thing. Here are all my successes. Here's what I'm doing in business. Here's what I'm killing in the gym, blah, blah, blah. Actually sharing something more vulnerable.
Hmm.
Actually going, shit, like, I had this blow up this morning with my wife, and blah blah blah. Or
Hmm.
think general things are going pretty well, but man, like last week, lost like two clients and things got pretty gnarly financially. Just
Hmm.
immediately sharing something to my comfort level of vulnerability, instead of just it's good. I'll never say, yeah, the game was great because I don't watch sports, but just kind of shifting the conversation immediately to something more vulnerable from something more traditional, and kind of leaning into the softness, the softer side of masculinity, really.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think those
Yeah.
are all great.
No
Um,
question there. Just kind of sharing some thoughts from what you were saying. But
mhm.
that does kind of lead me into the question I have before the final question.
Oh, hey, really quick. So,
Yeah.
like, something that I think traditional masculinity and I think more traditional upbringing do get right. Um, there are a lot of opportunities for men to get together, right? Like, you think about like your
Oh,
traditional,
yeah. Yeah.
right? You think about your traditional guy. He's like, like what are you doing this week? And like, I'm going hunting, right? I'm going hunting with the bros, or like I'm going out.
Hmm.
It's bro time. Like we've got like our fantasy football draft thing, and we're all going to St. Louis for the weekend. Like I have a friend who does that, and that's something that is missing from my life. Like I don't
Mm.
have those, I don't have a lot of those times because I'm like, in a lot of ways, I have subconsciously gone in the other direction where I'm like, oh, I don't do those things because that's like so traditional and so like
Mm. Hmm.
outdated, or like, no, I'm actually here for my wife. I'm not going to leave her alone with the kids,
Mm.
you know?
Hmm.
Um, but so I think that men who do get together with other men and do have like that I think that is a more traditional thing, but I think that they're better off for it.
Yeah. And then that kind of makes me think that might not be our thing right here. That might not be our thing of, I don't hunt, I don't watch sports, I don't go to sports, I don't, insert typical reason for men getting together here. But what if you just said yes anyway, and you saw it as an opportunity to kind of be this undercover agent for vulnerability? What if this
Mm,
was your opportunity to ninja in, to stealth in some opportunities to
mm,
change this experience, to change tradition, even just in your small group here, your couple of bros, whatever, your community, showing them that you can be present and showing them that you can be reliable and carve out time for them, I think absolutely is a great starting place. And then it's up to you. Here's your responsibility. Here's your new order, so to speak,
mhm,
to once you're in there and those experiences, change things up. Here's your opportunity to share, like what I was talking about. Instead of handshaking every time you guys meet at the bar, give them a hug. Like, hey
mhm,
guys, I loved doing this event with you. I got a lot of love for you. Love you. See you next time. Just begin to kind of plant those seeds, and you have the
mhm.
opportunity here, and you'll never know if you can change those experiences or not unless you don't try.
Yeah. It's not even so much that it's like a masculine activity. It's just the fact that you guys are getting together on a regular
Mm,
basis. Like it can be hiking. You guys could go to the Zilker Park together, which is like a, big park
which is
here in
great.
Austin.
Yeah.
Right. So, but I think that, you know, that masculine time together is important, and it could help us out a lot.
And I think that kind of brings us perfectly into what I wanted to talk about to wrap up this whole episode here. Being aware of things here and now in this generation is absolutely step one. Awareness is the first step in anything and everything that we want to maintain in a healthy way, but also that we want to change. What then is our best approach? What is our best hope for rewriting this masculinity narrative of bringing more awareness to men here and now, not only to change our experience, but for the next generation?
Mm. I mean, there has to be conscious thought on what that model looks like, and there has to be conscious thought on implementing actions that are not done subconsciously, that we're making decisions to be our ideal version of what we think is a more complete version of masculinity, and implementing that into our actions on a daily basis. But I think that in order for that to happen, there does have to be conscious thinking. Like you have to actually sit down and think about this, like, what does this look like? Like, how are my day-to-day actions going to be different if I want to, if I want to create this different version of masculinity. I think there's, I had Nate Checketts, who's the founder of Roan. It's a real, actually, I'm wearing them right
I
now.
see you're wearing the shirt
Um,
right now. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
awesome
Which
company.
love them. He's been on the show as well.
Oh,
We
cool.
aligned pretty quickly because their messaging, their mantra is forever forward. So
Oh,
it was
there you
easy.
go.
Yeah.
Just a bunch of forward arrows together. So he got on and he talked about. I think he had a little. I think he had a really stronger motivation than I did. Maybe than you do. To put forth a different, put forth a representation of what is an ideal man, because he has a son. He has sons. He's got like 5 kids. I don't know if it's 5, but he's got a lot of sons. But the point is, he actually, his kids are looking to him in this world where we're hearing about toxic masculinity. And so the question is like, well, what does strong, positive masculinity look like? And again, I think the only way to do that is to think about, okay, what was good, what was bad, what are some actions that are, what are some actions that are legitimately, you know, what are some actions that legitimately fall into the category of toxic masculinity, and what are some actions that don't fall into that, and we shouldn't get rid of that. So I think there's a lot to consider, but ultimately I think there has to be thought that goes into thinking about, what does this look like and how am I going to implement this.
Dean, it's been great having you back on the show, man. This has been a topic, a concept I've been wanting to unpack personally for a long time. And so I thank you for being very open in your answers and your experiences. And my hope for this episode is to help me continue to think on the traditional part of masculinity that aligns with me and what parts don't, and
Mm-hmm.
being able to have the awareness and the thought, to your point, of what I want to add and the type of man that I want to be and the type of man that I want to set an example for my future kids, my family, and the types of men that I also want to attract into my world, and also be on the lookout for, so that they can continue to teach me, mentor me, in every way that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
And so I want to ask one final question, man. Living a life ever forward, maybe through the lens of what we're talking about here, and better understanding and better creating a better man. Um, what does that mean to you here today, 2023? How do you live a life ever forward? How would you define that?
I think ever forward means continuing to grow in new ways, recognizing the changing world around you, recognizing that things that used to work will not work today or tomorrow, might not necessarily work today or tomorrow, and that we need to continually adapt in order to move forward. I think also part of that is holding on to holding on to some sort of foundation of your values. And I think that you need to get clear on what those values are, not as somebody else tells you what they are, but what your personal values are. So being able to have that strong foundation of yourself, and then being able to move forward with that foundation of yourself, based on best practices, based on the reality of a changing world, based on, who you want to be, as a person, but preserving the foundation, but always moving forward, adapting as necessary.
There's never a right or a wrong answer. I always appreciate my guest's interpretation after our conversation. So thanks, my
Mm-hmm.
man. Dean, where can
Yeah.
everybody go to connect with you and learn more about what you're doing in the world these days?
I'm on all the social medias, man.
The
YouTube,
socials.
Facebook, Instagram. I have a an awesome free 7-day beginners yoga for men challenge that you can do for free at manfulyoga.com/7DC. I've got a blog, manfulyoga.com/blog. And if you like podcast, I have the Better Man podcast, which is where you can tune in to hear me discuss a lot of the ideas that Chase and I were discussing today.
And I'll say from personal experience, um, as a guest on your show, phenomenal podcast. And as a user of your amazing yoga mat, incredible mat. Incorporating yoga into my life, but also as a form of exercise over the years has always benefited me. Especially when I do it like before a big lift day, I typically get a PR. I'm just way more loose and limber and more amazing in the lifts. So in support of my main form of exercise, it's incredible. The last 2 years, been making it more of a regular thing. Trying to get in 2 sessions a week has just helped immensely in my physical health, but also I feel like my stress is way lower. I'm connecting with cooler, different types of people. The guys that you meet in the gym deadlifting, and also the guys you meet in the gym doing yoga, they might be one and the same. My goal is to, have that be the community. I would love a guy that can, sit in, pigeon just as long as, he can, hit the deadlifts. But,
Right.
the different dynamics are great. So getting into more of a yoga practice has opened my eyes up to more different people and community and different types of men for sure. But that's kind of the balance, man, that I'm after. But also, man, your mats are incredible. I've used them, in studio, outside. So you guys want to check them out, I'll make sure to link them down in the show notes.
Thank you. Yeah.